On Saturday, April 23rd, there will be an Earth Day gathering on the Johnson and Sanford Dog Quad. It will run from 12 noon to 6 p.m. There will be speakers there like Grateful Bread, there's live reggae music, Tai Chi demonstration, free food provided by the Food Not Bombs, massage, vendors, and much more. BARC, in addition to other campus organizations, will have an information table there. Continuing in the spirit of Earth Week, on Sunday the 24th, Errol Wolf will be speaking in the Johnson Auditorium at 7 o'clock p.m. She's the co-founder of Descendant Farm, a 25-year-old revolutionary arts commune in Texas. Now I'd like to introduce Deo Robbins. Deo is the outreach director of the Earth Safe Foundation, and she'll be giving an introduction for John. Thanks a lot, and enjoy.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
I also want to thank Bart and the Speakers Forum for bringing us all here tonight. Let's give them a big hand. I am going to ask that after John's speech you refrain from taking flash pictures so that he can continue to see you all during the evening. However, you are welcome to take all the pictures you like of me. I'm going to make a couple of announcements and then lead a short visualization, and then we'll bring John on. EarthSafe, who has given you all some materials tonight, is the organization John founded after he wrote Diet for New America and was flooded with letters from people asking, how can we help? This feels so important to us. What can we do to get this message out? EarthSafe is about people in this room letting people out there know that we don't have to be destroying our planet. We don't have to be dying and suffering from preventable diseases. There's something each and every one of us can do. And we have tools, resources, information, projects you can get involved with. So I encourage you to become an EarthSafe member. You can turn your memberships into me tonight or send them in, or even ask me for more information if you want to know more about our projects. I want to mention one project tonight because of who you all are, and it's called YES, Youth for Environmental Sanity. It's our youth group outreach project, a group of young people who travel across the country, speaking to high school assemblies about what young people can do to create a future for themselves. They have summer training camps, youth environmental training camps, and a lot of other activities that some of you might want to know more about. So you can see me afterwards if you're interested in YES. Anyone who wants to or doesn't want to become a member tonight, we would like you to take a moment to fill out your mailing list card so we can stay in touch with you. And those you can turn in on the table on your way out. We would appreciate having you part of our network. If you're a student, please write student on your card so we know that there are certain materials you might be more interested in than others. We have available tonight at the reception following the lecture some materials John's written and videotape you'll be interested in. One is the Diet for New America, a book that has changed so many lives. And John will be available to sign these for you or your friends tonight. Also, In Search of Balance, which is a beautiful collection of meditations on living and the challenges that we face today. May All Be Fed, Diet for a New World, is John's newest book, which contains a lot of very helpful information on how to make the transition to a healthier lifestyle. There are ideas about how to stock your kitchen, recipes, how to make these changes in very practical ways, as well as some very beautiful thoughts and inspirations. So this is another thing you might want to consider taking home tonight. Finally, we have copies here tonight of Diet for New America, the home videotape, produced by KCET Public Television in Los Angeles. It's a 1-hour documentary on John's work, which is very powerful and a good way to share this information with friends and family. Now I would like to ask you to take a nice, deep, full breath and let out a big sigh. See if there's a way you can get a little more comfortable in your seat. Loosen any tight clothing and try another nice, deep, full breath. And this time, let me hear you sing out your sigh. Come on now, one more time. Deep, full breath. Don't be shy. That's better. Okay. And just take a moment to relax. Let go of the hassles of your day. Settle in. Take a moment to appreciate all the others who are here tonight, like yourself, to learn, to grow, to become better vehicles of change on this planet that so sorely needs us all. Feel free to close your eyes as that helps you to relax and settle in. And I'd like to ask you to picture in your mind's eye the kind of world that you would like to create. It might be a world where the waters flow fresh and pure. It might be a world where the air is clean and rejuvenating to breathe. It might be a world where we learn from and respect our children and all the freshness and hope and possibility that they bring. It might be a world where we all have good work to do, where everyone feels valued and valuable. It might be a world where we've learned to celebrate and appreciate our differences and all the many kinds of us there are. All of the human potential that we carry. Whatever your vision is for the kind of world you would like to create, let's all hold that together for just a moment. Slowly open your eyes if they've been closed. Thank you very much for joining with me in this, and I'm happy to present to you John Robbins.
This is a strange scenery. It looks kind of like a church. How about, these are all folding chairs. Why don't we change this? Let's make it into, we don't need an aisle in the middle, so let's get rid of that. And come up closer and kind of, let's make an arc or something like that, so we're closer to it. I don't want to be so far away from the back.
Whoa, crazy. I'll move the camera up too. I'll move the camera up too.
Why don't we do that? We can all be working together. All work together for a new seating.
Never make fun of Christian friends again. This is weird.
This is a new arrangement for
It's like a movie.
We won't need that mic. Bring in chairs, right? There's some spaces right over here. You can bring a chair right over here. That feels a little better. Does it feel better to you?
Yeah.
You can hear me okay? How's this sound system? You don't even know I'm asking this question. How is the volume of this sound system?
Good.
Is this okay like this? Thank you for coming. How many of you have read that afternoon? How many of you have known an animal in your life, or know an animal in your life, a non-human being? And that relationship, some of you have known a non-human being. Very good. Some of you have. How many of you have known an animal, and that relationship has enriched you as a human being? You've had that with an animal at some time. Thank you. How many of you have known someone, or know someone? Very good. Hands go. And that person has suffered or is suffering from either heart disease, stroke, diabetes, or cancer? Thank you. How many of you, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. How many of you feel stressed personally? Distressed personally? Yes, you kind of. Because you are aware that there are children and other human beings starving, dying of hunger on this planet as we speak. I mean, if you experience that as a personal issue. Okay, how many of you think that the environment is deteriorating increasingly under the impact of human activities? Thank you. How many of you think you know I'm asking these questions? I'm going to connect the dots between these areas and show how our personal lives, the choices we make, and the way that we live impact, influence, for better or for worse, many of the profound issues of our times. There is a transformation occurring in our society, in our world, in our times. And we see it everywhere we look once we're attuned to it, once we start to experience it personally. One of the shapes it takes is the change. The prevailing paradigm, the old culture, if you will, defines and understands power as the ability to dominate, to coerce, to subdue, to control each other, ourselves, nature. But the new understanding of power understands power as the ability to respond to and nurture life. The prevailing definition of success is measured exclusively in material terms, usually as the ability to consume resources. The deeper and arising sense of success is much more intimate than that, much more personal, and also much more comprehensive. It has something to do, I suggest, with the ability to welcome the spark of good in each other, to be in relationship to it, to resonate with it, to affirm it, to bring out the best in each other. To live in appreciation of our interdependence, in recognition of the value of life, independent of how readily it can be converted into revenue. Brianna Archler has called it in her book, The Chalice and the Blade, the shift from the dominator society to the partnership society. And in my own work, I have seen that possibility, that shift, being influenced by our food habits, by our eating choices, by the agricultural realities implicit in what we are eating. There is this saying you've heard, think globally, act locally. Well, it turns out there's nothing more local than the food on our plates in terms of the impact, the reverberations that ensue from these choices. Now, I grew up in a family that was involved in food, but not one in which what I'm calling the new paradigm had any influence at all. In fact, it was the veritable embodiment of the old paradigm. My dad and my uncle founded an ice cream company. Actually, my father did after World War II. And a few years later, his brother-in-law joined him. Because I was my father's only son, it was always expected in my family that one day I would follow in my father's footsteps. I was groomed to succeed him, literally. It was his agenda for me. Now, maybe it's inevitable that parents have an agenda for their youngsters. If we want to think of it in more positive terms, we might call it a vision, or how they will be most happy, or how we believe they might be most prosperous or secure. But if that belief system, if that set of expectations that the parents might have is out of keeping with, if it's in conflict with the inner destiny, the inner purpose, the capabilities of the younger, then you have a very challenging situation, one that many of us have experienced. I did. Because as I was maturing, I began to feel my own values, and they were not consistent with what my father's belief system for me was. And I felt pulled in a very different direction from within myself, from the one he had in mind. And I tried to help him to understand. I wanted myself to understand what I was doing, what I was thinking, what I was called to. And I remember saying to him at one point, look, Dad, we live in a different world now than when you grew up. Today, we know that every 2 seconds, somewhere on this planet, a child dies of hunger, while elsewhere there's abundant resources going to waste. The lack of social justice is appalling, and it's increasing. The gap between the haves and the have-nots at a worldwide level is staggering and growing worse. We live under a nuclear shadow. The life support systems of the earth are degrading. I said to him, do you understand that for me, under these circumstances, inventing a 30-second flavor just would not be an adequate response? He said, you're an idealist. And coming from him, that was no compliment. And I said, yes. He said, you're obviously intelligent and sincere, but you're crazy. You can't be successful and be an idealist. You will be poor, he said, and if you're poor, you'll be miserable. So what good will your ideals do you then? And I understood from within myself that he was giving me an opportunity to make a choice for what I believed in, for my own integrity, which I did. And I said to him, I don't want a trust fund, I don't want to depend on your achievements. And I walked away from the life, everything I had known as security. And the whole Robbins world. And I said to him, I don't want ever to depend on what you have done. That's your life. So I moved there when I moved, this was in the late 60s, to a little island off the coast of British Columbia, and we cleared land and we built a log cabin and we grew our own food. Not that we knew how, but we learned. And we lived on $500 a year, approximately, for almost 10 years. And if you don't think that was a pendulum swing from where I was coming, I mean, I used to jokingly say that in my family, roughing it meant room service was late. But now we were really roughing it because we were living a very Spartan life. And yet it was very, in its simplicity, it was elegant. It had a depth to it. We were sending our roots down into the natural world. The intention was to feel part of the planet, to heal the alienation, the isolation, to become again part, to feel in ourselves the cycles and the rhythms and the peace and the power of this earth. And this was our work. So one thing we did was we began to grow all of our food organically, and that was hardly heard of in those days. And we didn't know how to grow food. Neither of us had grown so much as a radish before. But since we were 5 miles from our nearest neighbor and had thrown ourselves into this situation on purpose, we now had to find out how to do that. I remember the first year we planted, among other things, cabbages. And to do that, we bought a packet of cabbage seeds and followed the instructions which said to plant the seeds every so far apart in rows, every so far apart. Well, I, being somewhat of an intellectual, thought I knew better. And I said, well, that's all very nice, the row stuff, but nature doesn't work that way. See, I was trying to get out of this, the urban nightmare. I was the First Street, Second Street, Third Street, the linear, rational, technological mind. I wanted to find something more intuitive and more organic. And so I said, well, let's just plant the seeds, you know, throughout the space. That's how nature was. I looked out into the wilderness, which was all around us. I didn't see rows of anything. So we did. We just planted the seeds. And then felt wonderful about it. And then I realized, wait a minute, now what do we do? Because it then said you're supposed to thin out the plants in the rows to a certain distance so they have enough room to grow properly. And I suddenly realized, how will I know which are the plants? Because they aren't in rows. Neither of us had ever grown a cabbage before. Neither of us had ever seen a cabbage plant. I knew what a cabbage was. That's the round thing, something like a basketball. It comes from the market. But then I realized, well, we have done something unusual. We have planted a lot of seeds simultaneously in one day. Therefore, they probably take a reasonably similar time to germinate. Therefore, whatever there comes up a lot of at once, those must be the cabbages. Well, soon enough, a few days later, well, actually the next day, there were little sprouts starting in the garden all over the place, all over, and very close to each other, and they said, so those must be, a whole lot of one thing looked exactly like each other. That must be the cabbages, I thought. So anything else that came up in the weeks to come, we just, pinched right out. And we gave these ones that we had, our designated cabbages, you see, we gave them plenty of space. And we cultivated around them, and we watered them, and we fertilized them, and we chanted upon them, and we did the whole thing. And they grew beautiful. In the weeks that followed, they grew really fast. They looked as if they were native to here, they grew so fast. And then I started to wonder, well, where does the cabbage appear, the thing that you eat? We were getting hungry. And I didn't know. Neither of us remembered to grow cabbages before. But I thought, well, it's not, I don't think it's a root or a tuber like a potato, but I wasn't really positive of that. So just to make sure I dug one up to see if there was anything like a cabbage, starting to develop under the ground. No, there wasn't. Kind of woody roots, but, so we just kept waiting and fertilizing and chanting and the whole works. And then one day I noticed that these plants, of which there were many, and they were really thriving, shooting around, looked a whole lot like plants that were growing just outside of the garden. Wild plants, weeds, except they were bigger. And I thought, oh my God, we must have found the one place on the planet where wild cabbages grow. These must, outside here, these must be the plants from which today's cabbages have been bred. I said, thank you, Lord, this is too much. And got right to work chanting and cultivating and fertilizing. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And then they flowered, and then we realized what we had done. We had grown the most incredible crop of thistles we have ever seen. And in so many ways, we learned the difference between knowledge, of which I had a great deal, and wisdom, of which I had very little. Wisdom being the ability to respond to life in a positive manner in all situations, to be adaptable and flexible and creative and positive in the service and what you love and cherish. And knowledge being something in the head that you can receive from somebody else. And so it was humbling. It was very humbling. And very good. Soon enough, we began to do other things. We did learn how to grow food a little bit. And one of the things that happened during these years is that my health improved dramatically. I had had a form of polio when I was a youngster, which had left me paralyzed from the waist down for a time. And then one of my legs grew back, but not the other one much. And when I was 21, my left leg was almost 3 inches shorter than the right one, and very weak and pretty withered. I couldn't put much weight on it for very long. And the doctor said to me, look, John, your growing years are over. Your bones are not going to grow anymore. You just have to live with this. Now, have you ever noticed that doctors can be a little negative sometimes? Maybe not know the whole scope of what's going on? In my case, what occurred was that when I took responsibility for my life, began to live by my own light, by my own values, and make choices that made sense to me, and I ceased to try to live up to the expectations of my parents and others when those were not consistent with my integrity. One of the things that happened was that my leg grew. I became a marathon runner and a triathlete. And it's as long as the other one. And it was just the tip of the iceberg. It was a physical healing. It was wonderful, but it was just an outer expression of something that was developing and occurring at a much deeper level than the merely physical. It expressed itself in the physical, as so many things will eventually do. And it was a sense of becoming available to the powers of healing. Not just the personal ones of the self, but of the entire web of life, the earth community, in which we are embedded more than we know, on which we depend more than we know, and in whose embrace we rest. The culture doesn't recognize our interdependence. The culture teaches us that we are separate selves, teaches us alienation. And the reason for that is that the more alienated we are, the more dispossessed of ourselves we are, the less present we are for our lives, the more susceptible we are to the manipulations of advertising and commercialism. The less friends you have, the less capability you have of being present with another human being, the more you will buy into the beer ads that promise you friendship and belonging by virtue of buying that beer. The less in touch you are as a woman, perhaps, with your own power and assertiveness and creativity, the more Virginia Slims can get you with their "you've come a long way, baby" bullshit. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so I realized that to take possession of oneself and one's life is not in accord with the agenda of our country. It is to be revolutionary, it is to be radical, and it is to be a friend to the highest aspirations and dreams in the hearts of all beings. And this then became my work, to try to understand what that might mean. I had marched with Dr. King in the 60s, the civil rights movement. I had been part of the protest then against the war in Vietnam. I had been a young radical. But I came to understand that something deeper was called for than merely political action. Something within, some inner work had also to happen before we could be effective. Otherwise, as so many historical realities demonstrate, revolutions merely recapitulate at every level the same dynamic. And I understood that and I had learned this from Dr. King too, that the dynamic of violence always seemed to produce more of itself. No matter in what name it was enacted, that the ends just did not justify the means. That the means, I began to understand, were to the ends as the trees, as the seed is to the tree. That was Gandhi's phrase. The means are to the ends as the seed is to the tree. So I began to ask what true nonviolence would be. And one of the places that it occurred to me that I had to answer those questions had to do with what I ate, because I knew that meat was the death of an animal. And I realized I didn't want to kill animals myself, but to pay someone else, in effect, to do it by purchasing it was just a cop-out. It was just a denial. It was just an obfuscation of the real connection there. So I chose to become a vegetarian. I didn't know I was doing something for my health, though it turned out that I was. I didn't know I was doing something for world peace or for ecological sanity, but it turned out that I was. I remember how I felt when I first learned that every fast food hamburger that's made from rainforest beef, every quarter pounder, represents the destruction of 55 square feet of tropical rainforest. And then when I would pass McDonald's bragging about how many billions have been sold, I couldn't help but translate that into how many 100,000 square miles of the world's oldest and most elaborate and richest biosystems destroyed. How many of the world's oldest Earth-based peoples obliterated, the indigenous cultures of this planet destroyed. How many species extinguished? What percentage of the Earth's lungs ripped out? Or what I learned that 85% of the topsoil erosion in the United States, the USDA attributes to livestock. Or when I learned that over half of the water used in the United States for all purposes is used in the production of meat. Or when I learned that the breast milk of vegetarian mothers has only 1/35, 3% roughly, the residue, the contamination from pesticide residue, as does the breast milk of meat-eating mothers. When I began to understand how the food chain works and what the real costs are of modern meat production, factory farm systems of feedlot beef and so forth, I began to really question what are we as a society doing? People sometimes say to me, why are you a vegetarian? Is it because the animals, the ethical? Is it because of the ecology? Is it because of health? I say, I don't, it's all of those. It's all of those put together. They simply reinforce one another. For me, I recognize that for some individuals, some of these issues are more telling than others, but for me, they all point in the same direction. Why do I have to choose? The animal issue has become extreme today. You know, down through history, there have been ethical vegetarians, people who have been humanitarian oriented, and they've said, I won't eat animals because there's a death involved. While I can have something else to eat, I'll make the non-violent choice. You'd be surprised who some of these people were. Gandhi, of course. But did you know that Albert Schweitzer became this? And also Albert Einstein, Plato, Socrates, Leonardo da Vinci, Tolstoy, many of the people that we find admirable. George Bernard Shaw, the British playwright, is such a human. He put it in his unique way, very strongly. He said, yes, a man of my spiritual intensity does not eat corpses. That's what he said. Subtle, but you can get his point. But you see, today there's a new reality. It isn't merely that the animals are killed, which was his gripe there. The way they're treated, the way they live, it's not just their death, it's how they live. Because today, the family farm, the barnyard, the pasture, Lassie and Timmy running around on the farm, you know what I'm talking about? It has been replaced and is almost dead because of the advent and the growth of the factory farm, agribusiness owned and dominated methodologies. Here we find animals kept indoors, in confinement, under conditions that violate their natures completely, that frustrate every one of their natural urges. The diets they're fed are absolutely bizarre. Feedlot cattle given cement dust because it's the cheapest way to gain weight on the animal. Ever feel a little heavy after eating some roast beef? There's a connection here. So you see that the animals suffer in today's factory farms unbelievably. And you don't have to be an animal rights activist or a vegetarian to find it appalling if you see it. You just have to be willing to look, willing to lift the veil a little bit of denial in which most of us breathe. See, our culture depends on a great deal of denial of who we are, of our powers, gifts, and feelings, in order to continue its march to oblivion, its relentless pursuit of success, defined in a way that the more successful you are, generally speaking, the more damage you do to the planet. the more resources you consume, the more fossil fuels you burn, the more CO2 has your name on it as it floats up into the atmosphere. Now there's a television show. I don't know how many of you have seen this show. It's called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Are you aware of this show? How many of you know this show? It's terrible, isn't it? It's pathetic. It's really the statement of this mentality. I got to tell you a story. This program, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, called me up a couple years ago and said they wanted to do a show on me. I couldn't believe it. I said, you've got to be kidding. I don't like your show. I said, you exalt the shallow. You glorify conspicuous consumption. I said, your motto ought to be shop till the planet drops. She said, I'm sorry you feel that way, but in our behalf, may I say that we're not a negative scandal show. We try to do positive things. We're not current affair or heart copy. I said, that's very nice. I'm glad. Big deal. I'm not the kind of person that you talk about. I said, maybe you're looking for Harold Robbins, the author. She said, no, John Robbins, died from America. I said, why on earth? I'm the opposite of what you're about. I said, because I'm not rich. She said, well, you could have been rich. I said, right, lifestyles that could have been rich, thanks. And then I said, why? What do you want with me? She said, well, the truth is that some of us on the staff here have read your books, been greatly affected by them, and consider them the most important documents of this century. And we'd like to use our program to help get your message to some people who might otherwise not be exposed to it. Well, I said, that's different. Why didn't you say so? And we got to talking. Then I said, but there's no show for you here. I looked out the window of our little rented place and saw a 1978 Datsun with 200,000 miles on it. And I looked around at our little scrubby place. I said, look, this is not, I don't live the way you think. And I explained that I never had in my adult life any connection whatsoever to my family's money. And then she said, well, once a year we're allowed to do a different kind of show. She said, once a year we're allowed to do a show on very wealthy people who use their resources for good, for philanthropic purposes. I said, well, that's great. I said, that's wonderful. I wish you did that show every week. And once a year you did your student show. I said, but still, you've got to get this. That's not me. I don't have that money. And she said, well, we'll think of something. Please. And so I said, okay. And we made a date. And on that date, at that hour, a van drove up my street. In the gaudiest script on that van was written, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. I was totally embarrassed. My neighbors. It was terrible. And out of the van come cameras and lights and people galore. There was a light man, a camera person, a tape guy, the producer, the director, and the person whose job it was to go get hamburgers for lunch. And it was just incredible. And I'm looking at, we have a little place, you see, and how are they going to fit all this equipment? Well, they come to the door, and knocking on the door is this camera guy, big heavy set guy, probably 220 pounds. I later realized he didn't have a clue what was going on with me, but they knock on the door, I open the door, he stares, says, excuse me, we're looking for John Robbins' house. I said, you found it? That's me, welcome, come in. He just, this is where you live? I said, yes, we're very happy here. I hope you're as happy. Please come in. Now, he was obviously uncomfortable, and I didn't think it all the way through, and I just wanted to help him be comfortable. So I gestured to a chair and invited him if he'd like to have a seat. And then he froze even further. And then I saw for a moment the chair through his eyes. Now, you have to understand, we only had a few chairs. They were vinyl-covered stuffed chairs that we got at Sears on sale. And they weren't much to begin with, but our cats, our cats, that's as if we had them. They have us, frankly. They allow us to feed them and, pay homage to them and so forth. And they long ago decided that these particular chairs were their personal scratching posts. And they've lacerated the vinyl. And at this point, there's more stuffing showing that vinyl, you see. And a long time ago, we just gave up trying to control this. We consider it an art form of the cats. Furthermore, the cats decide who sits where. As any of you who have lived with these animals will know. And I had foolishly gestured to these chairs as if they were mine to do so with. But furthermore, then I saw the camera moving at me, all this stuffing coming out all over the place. And he just, "I'll stand, thank you," he said. But it was the beginning of a fine few days, actually. To my surprise, we had a lot of fun. The staff was very respectful. Not all of them had read the books, most of them hadn't. But they would listen to me during the interview time and so forth. And then, shortly after that, they cut lights off, tape off. And then the crew, the staff were full of questions, which I would answer. Actually, I think they would have been better off taping that part of it. But the staff, we gave them all copies of Diet for New America and some of our materials, and they read them during the breaks and in the evenings. And they did something then. They made a decision as a group to go veggie for the duration of our time together, which I thought was very respectful, actually, given what I was talking about. I thought it was very nice, very honorable. I liked that. And we had fun at the end. They filmed the fundraiser Earth Save Hand and some things. And then at the end, when it was time for them to leave, this cameraman that I had been describing to you shook my hand and very warmly told me that he had never felt so at home in any of the houses they had filmed. And he said, "We have flown to private islands and gone through all these private gates and whatnot." He said, "But no one has ever invited us for lunch before." Well, we had lunch. We were making lunch. We made a big soup. Of course we made enough for everybody. I wouldn't know another way. But evidently this was unique to him, and he was very appreciative. It just saved him from going out for... How would they, if they were going to go veggie, where were they? They didn't know how to order in a restaurant. Veggie burgers, something like that, I don't know. But anyway, then the woman who had originally made the call to me, the producer, had a very deep feeling. We hugged, she was weeping, she thanked me again and again, and she said that now she knew why she had remained in Los Angeles with this show all this time. She said, actually, it's a very shallow show. But she said, now I know why it's to do this show. This makes it all worthwhile. So it's a beautiful feeling. They left. I was glowing a little bit. Then I realized, with all the hours of tape, I haven't a clue what's going to show up on the television screen. Because all those hours will be reduced to a 15-minute segment by somebody in an editing room who will manufacture the show in a way. They can make it look any way they want, and I was concerned. But it did turn out okay. They aired it many times. And in fact, it turned out quite beautiful, which is why I want to tell you about this. Why I'm telling you this story. Robin Leach, do you know who he is? I mean, I've been around him, and I still don't know. But whoever he is, he called me the prophet of non-profit. Which is not, I like that. I've been called a lot of things. I like that. And he has me on camera quoting Thoreau, saying, quoting Thoreau, "I make myself rich by making my wants few." Lifestyles leaders are famous. Not their usual doctrine, is it? I thought that was remarkable. And then, at one point they used a special lens to make the living room look larger. And they're scanning the room with this camera, and there's these chairs. And Robin Leach says, and I haven't a clue where he got this, he says, "Every stick of furniture in their house is recycled." But it was very nice, and he went well. And then at the end of the program on the television, they showed the picture of the whole Earth from space. You know the photograph I mean? It's suspended amongst the stars of a luminous jewel, fragile, beautiful, blue-green jewel. And they leave it on the screen for a long time. They don't make it move around and jump images to keep your attention, like normally television does. And they have beautiful music in the background. And Robin Leach says, and this is the climax of the show, this man's life goes to show that he who believes, he who dies with the most toys wins, doesn't see the whole picture. There's the whole earth in space. And I thought, my goodness, if we have reached lifestyles of the rich and famous, of all things, we have done something. Something has happened in our culture that has made that possible. And I think that something that has happened and that is continuing to happen is the amalgam of the individual choices made in honesty in the human hearts to cherish life, to respect life. Those higher choices have created a momentum of energy, have created a possibility for all things. Now, you can think of this in terms of the 100th monkey. But I don't know how many monkeys it takes. I do know that we are more interwoven with one another's souls than we can possibly grasp. And therefore, every choice each of us makes has an impact on all others. And I don't believe that at the end of a life, the measure of human life can't be in any way assessed by how much money you made, or how important you thought you were, or what other people thought of you. I think it has a great deal, however, to do with how rooted you were in your own being. And how much your life is an expression of your essence. How much you lived who you are. And there are a lot of us asking how we can make our life statements of what we love. And to ask those questions honestly means also to face the ways in which our lives are inconsistent with or irrelevant to our deepest feelings, our wholeness, and our quest. And what I've discovered is that the way most of us eat in this society is an insult to the common heart. It's certainly an insult to the animals, who are made to suffer so incredibly in it. It's also an insult to our health, to the body as a temple, as the possibility of an free-flowing clarity of expression of who we are. Because it clogs us up, it makes us sick, it takes our energy away, it kills us. It's certainly an insult to the environment, to the rainforest. It's also an insult to the world's hungry, the world's less fortunate. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose that we were about to have dinner. Instead of the lecture continuing, we're going to stop and have a meal. And let's suppose for dinner tonight we split this group in half, right down the middle. And those on this side of the room, would you raise your hands, please, so everybody here can see? Let me see everybody on this side of the room's hands. I think so. Yep. Okay. For you tonight, we have available a buffet, if you will. And you can have, if you would like, there are salads, there's steamed vegetables, there's pastas of all kinds. There's brown rice and white rice, there's potatoes, there's tofu dishes. For dessert, we have apple pie, all kinds of plant foods, all kinds of dishes prepared from grains and vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds. Do you think you'd be okay for tonight? Can you enjoy this? Okay, have a good time, bon appetit. We will leave you for the moment. Because over here we have a different menu. Over here, let's see, for those of you on this half whose last names begin with A, B, or C, could you raise your hands nice and high, please? Thank you. For you tonight, we have available, if you would like, we have a steak, a baked potato, a small salad, and for dessert, ice cream. I will see to that. The rest of you, D through Z, raise your hands if you would, please. Thank you. The vast majority. For you, I'm sorry, we have water only, but you may enjoy it. I do. Why did I do that? What am I doing here? There's a point. I want you to understand this. The food resources, the land, the water, the energy, the human labor, that are required to produce the food eaten on this side of the room with everyone feasting a plant-based diet, equal those required to produce the food eaten on this side of the room, even though the vast majority of people over here aren't eating anything at all. Do you understand? You see, it takes 16 pounds of grain on average to make 1 pound of feedlot beef. It only takes 1 pound of grain to make 1 pound of whole wheat bread. You understand? It's not just the grain, it's the water, the energy. Water. The state of California is in a state of drought, more or less perennially. I live in California. The University of California Agricultural Extension at UC Davis, the primary agricultural campus of the university system in the state, did a study on water use in agriculture in the state. They determined how much water it takes to produce a pound of apples or lettuce or tomatoes or celery or beef or chicken. And they came out with figures. And I want to emphasize who did this study. University Extension, because it wasn't a vegetarian group. You might think when you saw the results that someone had an agenda. That maybe distorted their objectivity. Here's the numbers they came out with. The average pound of California apples require, according to UC's extension, 49 gallons of water. The average pound of lettuce takes 23 gallons of water. The range for fruits, vegetables, and grains was from a low of 19 gallons of water to a high of 70 gallons of water per pound of production. That was for grapes. You see the range, 19 to 70? For beef, the average pound of California beef requires, they said, 5,214 gallons of water. Do you know how much water that is? That's enough water to fill a stack of 1 gallon water containers, like you might bring a bottle of water from the market in over a mile high. Or here's another way to think of it. Let's say you took a shower every day, 7 days a week. How many of you know what the maximum legal flow rate through shower heads is in the state of Massachusetts? 2.5 gallons of water per minute is the maximum legal limit. You can't, if you go to a plumbing supply place and try to buy a shower head any more than that, you won't find it. If a contractor installed one, they'd be technically violating not only building codes, but other laws. Okay, so let's say you took showers that averaged 5 minutes each, 7 days a week. How many minutes would you spend in the shower? In a week? Is that too hard? 7 days a week, 5 minutes per shower. Math majors? Nuclear physicists here? I gotta get an answer to this. If you take 7 showers a week, how much? 35, correct? You win the prize. Do you understand? This is very simple. You're in the shower 35 minutes a week if you take a shower every day and they average 5 minutes each. Okay. Now, if the flow rate through your shower head is 2.5 gallons per minute, which is the legal maximum in this state, how much water do you use in a week? 2.5 times 35, let's say that's about 90. That's a little hotter, but let's average it that way. Now, there are 52 weeks in a year, right? So you use less than 5,000 gallons of water a year, showering every day. So do you understand that in the state of California, for example, you actually save more water by not eating 1 pound of beef than you would by not showering for an entire year? Actually, you save more water than almost 2 years of showering in California because the legal limit for the flow rate through the shower heads in that state is 1.5 gallons per minute. I'm trying to point out the extravagant use of water in modern meat production. Energy. A Cornell study concluded that it takes 39 times more energy to produce a pound of protein from beef than it does to produce a pound of protein from soybeans. And 22 times more energy to produce protein from beef compared to corn or wheat. Do you like wildlife? Do you appreciate wildlife? There is no wildlife without habitat. And one of the great habitats of wildlife are forests. I'm not talking about tree farms, I'm talking about forests. It is said that when the founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence a squirrel could at least theoretically have traveled from one coast to the other without ever setting foot on the soil. So thickly forested was this country. Where it wasn't forest, it was native prairie grass that stood as much as 15 feet high. Teeming with life, resplendent with a diversity of life forms, exquisite, ecstatic celebration of the life forms. But today, if you fly from one coast to the other, what you mainly see if you look out your airplane window are squares, row crops in the Midwest. We call it our breadbasket, but it's not growing bread. Most of those row crops are soybeans and corn and oats. Not so many of them are wheat, and it is not producing bread. It's growing animal feed. 90% of the soybeans grown in the United States are fed to animals, not humans. 90% of the oats, likewise. Do you understand? It takes 16 pounds of those grains to make 1 pound of beef. What we're doing, you see, is we have cut down our forests, we've destroyed the habitat of our wildlife, and extinguished countless species, in order to have land on which to grow these enormous amounts of grain that our meat consumption requires. And where it isn't forest that's been conquered like that, it's land that has been exploited for grazing and overgrazed because of the vast numbers of our animals that are needed to feed a meat-centered diet to the large numbers of people that have come to inhabit this place. We have traded our wildlife and our forests for cheeseburgers. The good news is that a lot of that can be reversed. A Cornell, again, study found that for every individual in the United States who shifts from the standard American meat-oriented diet to a vegetarian diet, an acre of trees is spared. Or inversely, an acre of land that had been forest, that has been destroyed, in order to create land on which to grow animal feed or graze animals, can be returned to forest. Not overnight, but it can be done. Of course, it can't be done if the majorities of us are still clamoring for our steaks, still believing the Beef Council when they tell us that meat is real food for real people, and not recognizing that, in fact, it's real food for real heart attacks and real ecological destruction. But it's interesting that they should use a phrase like that, because real people. As if vegetarians aren't real. The irony is that, to my eyes, it takes a lot of courage to leave the pack. To do something that your parents maybe don't understand, your friends may not understand, you may not yet fully understand. And that, to me, is real. That has something to do with what makes us more alive in our own experience. The contamination of our food chains and our biosphere with pesticide residues has gotten so extreme now. I remember when the Beef Council came out with that advertising campaign, they employed, first of all, James Garner. You know who that is? Rockford Files. Used to be Maverick. I don't know how many of you remember that show. I grew up with it. I loved it. He was kind of a Taoist cowboy. His modus operandi wasn't to fight or shoot everybody. It was more to kind of finagle his way around things by being charming. Kind of went with the flow a little bit. He did kind of Aikido instead of judo. There's something very, almost yin in that. I found it very, very attractive. But then he ended up this maverick of all people. Maverick meaning the one who goes their own way, who's not a prisoner of the conforming mold. He ends up being the spokesperson for the Beef Council's drivel. I was chagrined to see this, but then I felt some amusement or some karmic law at work when he ended up in the hospital with a quintuple bypass procedure. The Beef Council, of course, said it was not the meat, it was his smoking that caused this. They did not want to publicize the fact that all the studies show that among smokers, meat eaters have far more heart attacks and cancer than non-meat eaters. Among non-smokers, meat eaters have far more cancers than vegetarians and heart attacks. Then the Beef Council couldn't continue with Mr. Garner under these conditions, so they hired Sybil Shepherd, the actress, who became pregnant, which didn't alarm the Beef Council because they'd already done all the shooting and they had all the film and didn't mind that one bit. However, during her pregnancy, she became aware of a study that had been published in the New England Journal, one I alluded to earlier. It was the breast milk of vegetarian mothers as compared to the breast milk of meat-eating mothers for pesticide residues, and particularly the chlorinated hydrocarbons, which include DDT, indiolefin, and heptachlorine, the worst, most toxic of the pesticides. They found 35 times higher concentrations of these pesticides in the breast milk of the meat-eating mothers compared to the vegetarian mothers. She learned of the study. She stopped eating meat. She did not want to take this into her milk. She intended to breastfeed her baby. And then she made a mistake, or had the audacity to mention this to the press. So then they did not want her to be their spokesperson either. So then they hired another actress, one named Kim Alexis, who was happy to do the commercials and receive her checks. But then when she was interviewed, she said, "Beef? Never eat this stuff. It's gross." The poor Beef Council was having a problem. I wrote them a letter volunteering to be their spokesperson. If only they let me speak whenever I wanted to, but they didn't take me up on it. But they do have problems today. To them, it's a PR issue. So the animal rights movement is publicizing the reality of the animal experience. And their response is to deny it. Is to say, we're making it up. Is to say, it's not true. We treat our animals just like members of our family, they say. I'm sorry, but unless you raise your family for slaughter, it's probably not true. But they'll deny right, left, and center. And I was on a television program at one point, actually it was National Public Radio, debate with a representative of the National Cattlemen's Association once, and he was so full of this BS. At one point I said to him, "Look, you know as well as I do that you're only saying that because you're paid to do so." And he did not like that, and he looked at me and said, "Well, you're just trying to sell your book." I said, "Well, actually, to be quite frank, if my primary motivation for what I'm doing was to make money, I never would have left Baskin Robbins." And he said, "Well, you got a point." And I said, "But it's okay, I know that your children have every bit as right as mine to have clean air and clean water, and I'm working for them too." He said, "I know." They do know, many of them, but they're stuck in it. And for them, the gap between what they know and what they're doing is killing them. Because they're out of integrity. And in order to maintain that habit, the denial is implacable. Now, my father is interesting because his denial level is pretty high. About 25 years ago, my uncle, Bert Baskin, my dad's brother-in-law and partner, died of a heart attack. And when that happened, I asked my father, "Do you think there could be any connection between the amount of ice cream that Uncle Bert would eat and his heart attack?" And my father said, "No, absolutely not. His ticker just got tired and stopped working." And I looked into my father's eye and I saw such commitment to denial. Implacable. Do you know what I mean when I say a no-talk rule? That there are certain things that cannot be discussed in certain families. You just can't mention it without everything going crazy. Taboos against certain thought. Well, in my family, to discuss that there might be possibly a connection between ice cream and heart disease was not allowed, at least if my father was present. Or if there was any connection to who died in hell. Again, not a lot. And I could see why. I mean, this man had manufactured and sold more ice cream than anyone in the history of this planet. He did not want to think of himself as a murderer. And he's actually a very nice man, very, very heartful in his own areas. And he just didn't know all those technology. He didn't want to consider it, did not want to look into it at all, even the possibility. However, and I want you to understand this, 5 years ago, my father's health was not good. His cholesterol level was 300, which is dangerously high, very, very high. His blood pressure was so high, he had to take 12 what he called horse pills every day, which had very serious side effects. His diabetes had progressed to the point that the prognosis was that he would go blind, that he could end up on a kidney dialysis machine, and that he might lose a foot or even a leg to gangrene. His weight was a real problem for him. He wasn't well. And one day he went to his cardiologist, and the physician told him, "Mr. Robbins, I must tell you something. All we can do for you now is juggle your medications to ameliorate some of your symptoms. We can probably give you a few more years and make them a little more comfortable. That's all we can do for you. However, if you really want to get well, there is this book," and he hands him a copy of Diet for a New American. Oh God, how I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in that room and see my father's face. I mean, this is the renegade son that, said no to everything he'd ever done and believed in and lived for him. And all of a sudden, his physician, the high priest of Western medicine, is telling him that there would be something for him in my work. Well, by the way, when I say high priest of Western medicine, that's more than a metaphor. What's the difference between God and a doctor? God doesn't think he's a doctor. So, my father goes home, tries these things, he reads the book a little bit, tries basically changes in his way of eating, and he gets some results. So he makes some more changes, gets more results, makes more changes, gets more results. He's a very practical man. He kept charts. Today, my father's cholesterol is 150. His blood pressure has come into complete balance. He needs no longer, instead of 12 horse pills every day, he takes one every other day. And he told me he's sure he doesn't need that any longer. The side effects of that medication are gone. His diabetes is cured, or it's totally in total remission. His blood sugar levels have lost all their brittleness, in medical terminology, that's the way it's phrased. And what it means is, he's not going to go blind, he's not going to need insulin shots, he doesn't even need diabetic pills any longer, he's not going to lose anything to gangrene, he's not going to ever be on a kidney dialysis machine. His weight, he's lost 30 pounds, and his golf game has improved 10 strokes, which may be the most important one of these profiles, and I'm not sure to him, but anyway, they all fit together, and he's very pleased. And by the way, these kinds of results that he's gotten, as dramatic as they are predictable. They are not idiosyncratic. They are predictable for someone his age, who's lived in it as he had, and makes the kind of changes sincerely and dutifully as he has. He wrote me recently, he said, "Thank God some of us have lived long enough to learn a few new things." And I thank God for that too, that he has lived that way. He said to me that he is not a card-carrying vegetarian. A phrase which reminds me of McCarthy. He also said to me, "You and people of your ilk have been telling us in business for years we needed to respect the environment and conserve our resources and pay attention to the limits and the teachings of nature." He said, where I thought that was all BS. He said, "I thought that there was an infinite number of trees and they were put on this earth to convert into shopping centers and ice cream stores." He said, "But time has proved you right." And for my father to say to the son who disappointed him so much that I might have been right. I respect him for that more. The inner strength that it took for a man in his position to say something like that, I respect that more than all his business achievements, because it's of the heart. And it allowed us to connect together in a whole new way. And that he could change, because this is not the kind of person you would expect to see these kinds of changes from. Again, where does it come from? It comes from an atmosphere that is changing. Something is afoot in our world. You will not read about it, though, in the newspapers. If you want to know the news, what really is new, what is arising, what is emerging, what is taking place in our time that's important, I suggest you go on a media fast. Because the newspapers and the television news report what they consider to be the news in the way that they consider it to be, and they are directly in alignment with what I call a multinational agenda, which has to do with the commercialization of our world and our minds and our beings. If you really want to know the truth of what's going on, who you are, I suggest that you listen to your own heart in silence. And that you look also into the hearts of the people who are in your keeping. Because there, in both cases, you will see at work the forces that are forging the paths of truth and love. There you will see the possibilities of our future. There you will see your own potential. But you won't hear about it from Dan Blather or the other spokespeople for a dying world. We are caught betwixt and between two worlds today. And all of us feel that tension in our own lives. We must. There's no other way. We may not identify it in the way that I just had, or speak about it that way. But there is a tension between who we are, essentially, where our dreams would take us, and the practical realities that many of us are confronted with. I believe that when we choose compassion for ourselves and each other, and when we choose ecological sanity, learn to live in harmony with the natural world, instead of exploiting it for resource use. And when we learn to live in harmony with ourselves and each other, with the members of the opposite sex, with our children and our elders. When we learn these things, that learning spreads, and it becomes part of a greater learning that is taking place in our world. I think a lot of us are learning that today. And we're growing healthier as a result. It's very interesting. Some people say, well, I just want to be healthy. The rest of this is very nice. I don't understand it. I want to be healthy. I don't want to have a heart attack. I don't want to have cancer. I'm afraid of these things. I want more energy to live. It's very interesting. The food choices that are in fact healthiest, that have been shown in scientific research and medical research, to give us the longest lives and the strongest immune systems, and therefore the least susceptibility to infectious diseases. The food choices that give us the least vulnerability to degenerative diseases are the same ones that give us our expressions of compassion to other animals and are most ecologically sensitive. When we move in a vegetarian direction, all of these things are fulfilled. The leading cause of death in the United States is the heart attack, particularly the type of heart attack called a myocardial infarction. What happens there is that an artery feeding the heart becomes occluded, blocked off, plugged up, narrowed to the point that the blood can't flow through it. And thereby the flow of oxygen and nutrients carried in the blood cannot reach the part of the heart fed by that artery. That part of the heart dies, and in the case of a fatal heart attack, killing the person. And when a heart attack is fatal, sometimes the heart attack victim is put on an autopsy table to be autopsied. What happens next is the chest is broken open. The people in the autopsy room literally break the rib cage, go in and find the coronary artery that had become occluded, snip it, And then they ream it out. They pull out of it this fatty waxy material shaped like a sausage that killed this human being as surely as a bullet to their heart would have done so. They send this material down to the pathology lab. And next day come back the results. This is a procedure that has been done millions of times worldwide, and the results have always said variations of the same thing. Saturated fat and cholesterol. They do not find carrots, broccoli, or brown rice in the arteries or heart attack victims. Where does that come from, that saturated fat and that cholesterol? 100% of the cholesterol we take into our bodies comes from animal products. I'm sure you know that egg yolks are outlandishly high in cholesterol, but all animal products contain cholesterol. No plant products do. And as far as saturated fat goes, 3/4 of the saturated fat we take in comes from animal fats. Dairy fats, butter fats, lard, meats of all kinds. Fish is high in cholesterol, but is not high in saturated fats. The other saturated fats, by the way, besides the animal fats, are primarily tropical oils, such as coconut, palm oil, palm kernel oil, and to some extent chocolate. That's what's killing us, the animal fats. The more animal fat we run through our bloodstream every day, the more closed up our arteries become, the more narrow, the more tight, and the more suffocated our organs become from the lack of oxygen they no longer receive. Now, sometimes people say to me, well, what's wrong with a heart attack? I mean, at least you go fast. Often I speak to Fortune 500 boards, elderly white gentlemen who are all seemingly overweight and of a certain mindset, and they'll say to me questions like this. They'll say, what's wrong with a heart attack? At least it's quick. Got to die of something. And to these gentlemen, I will say, well, you have to understand the heart attack is only the outcome of a process leading to it of arteriosclerosis in which the arteries are compromised. I said, during which time, which is the bulk of your life, the circulation to all of your organs, gentlemen, is reduced. That's right. And then I will tell them about a Lancet study published in a British medical journal, Lancet, a prestigious journal, in which 2 groups of approximately 500 men were studied. They'd all come to a clinic for treatment of impotence. And 500 of them were put in a group that received the standard medications. The other 500 were put on a strict vegetarian diet without the medications. At the end of 6 months, 98% of the people on the strict vegetarian diets considered themselves either cured or dramatically improved. I'll take their word for it. Less than 20% of the gentlemen receiving the medication considered themselves even improved. I said, you see, it's the quality of your life. And that's what we're talking about, not just that you die or how many years you live. It's the quality of life in your years. Sometimes people will say to me, well then, what are you going to die of? What do vegetarians die of? And I have to wonder sometimes why people, I don't personally, I have to be honest with you, I don't worry about it. I don't wake up in the middle of the night sweating, thinking, oh my God, the statistics say the way I eat, I'm not going to have colon cancer, I'm not going to have a heart attack, I'm not going to have diabetes, I'm not going to have prostate cancer, I'm the wrong sex, basically to have breast cancer, that's another problem, I just don't know. I don't have that particular, maybe I'm repressing it, I don't know. But they do have a point, these people, I acknowledge this. I mean, someday I'm going to look really stupid. So are a lot of you health food-oriented people, vegetarian types, people. If you exercise, you express yourselves, you try and contribute to the well-being of other people. You know what? There we're going to be, lying in the hospital, dying of nothing. It's a funny place. It's a funny world. It's a funny time. We live in a world in which the people who make food choices that are ecologically sensitive, that are compassionate, that are healthy, are considered weird. Whereas the people who make food choices that are exacting a terrible toll on the planet, entailing great cruelty and suffering to other creatures, burdening their body with excess fat and cholesterol, are considered normal. Maybe in these times, To be called weird is a compliment. Maybe in these times, to be different is an ecological imperative. Maybe in these times, to be honest with ourselves is to ask, does my life express what I would like to contribute to this world? I want to close with a story about a human being. Could be any human, male or female, who is walking through life in the latter part of the 20th century in North America, taking the human journey, experiencing the human condition, learning from their experience. And this person finds themselves walking along a path and they see a building, a large building. You can't tell from the outside what's inside. There are no signs written upon it, nor windows to look through. And you go up to the building, you walk the stairs to the door, and you open the door and you look in. Inside this building, it turns out, is a factory farm. What you see could be veal calves chained to the neck so tightly they can't turn around to lick themselves. They can't take a single step in their entire lives. They're standing knee-deep in their own excrement. Or maybe you see layer hens, the chickens from whom 99% of America's eggs come, caged so tightly they can't lift a single wing. The fluorescent lights are on 24 hours a day to manipulate their egg-laying cycles. You see the antibiotics mixed into every dose of feed. You see the beef cattle, their ears being implanted with artificial hormones. You see the animal suffering, and you think of the animal you thought of a while ago when I asked you, had you known a non-human creature that has enriched you as a human being? And you look at the plight of these animals who have done nothing to anyone. And you close the door and you walk on. Down the road you see a building that draws your attention. Again, you can't tell from the outside what is going on inside. There are no windows to look through. There are no signs to tell you. Again, you approach, and you walk up the stairs to the door, and you open it, and you look inside. This, it turns out, is what we call a packing plant. That's a euphemism, really. It's a slaughterhouse. You look in and you see the animals being funneled, channeled to their demise. Assembly lines of killing. You hear the screams. You smell the stench. Blood. Fear is everywhere. And as well as the animals in such misery, what catches your eye and draws your feelings this moment are the human beings you see. There are people in here. People who are making their living doing this. And you don't judge them. You're too mature for that. You see instead that these are people who wake up in the morning, come to work, punch the time clock, and for the next 8 or so hours, pick up a sledgehammer and knock the brains out of animals, or pick up some knives and slit the throats out of animals, or pick up chainsaws, snarling, cutting the flesh, the still warm flesh, fragrant with life, from animals who only moments before drew breath from the same source as each of us does. These people, this is how they make their living. And then they, at the end of the day, they wash up, punch the time clock, go home. And at night they tell their children stories, read their children stories about cuddly animals to help them sleep. These are people. They're not evil. You understand they're doing our dirty work. We pay them to do this. They're just trying to feed their families. You understand that it is our choice that they be here. They are embodying our callousness as a culture. And you see the price they pay for this. You see what, in order to work here, they must do in their own hearts, the wall they must build of brick and stone and denial. that they could tolerate this atmosphere. And you realize the implications to their families and to our life. You close the door now, and you walk. You walk quite a ways on your journey through life here in the latter part of the 20th century in North America. You come now to a hospital, and you look inside, and you see the human suffering. Over here is the cancer ward. Over here, there's surgeries going on. You see the family waiting. Her husband, their father, has had a stroke, and he's under the knife. And the doctors say that there is no guarantee that he will live. If he does, there's no guarantee that he will be able to recognize and remember his family when he sees them. You see, the doctor explains, an artery feeding the brain had become occluded, blocked off with the saturated fat and the cholesterol from his diet. And you see the suffering, and you know that much of it would not have occurred had not these people fed themselves from the products of the two previous buildings. And you think of the person you thought of an hour or so ago when I asked you, have you known someone, do you know someone who's had these diseases? And you realize that most likely that person would not have had that problem had they had the benefit and acted on the benefit of what we're talking about here. The statistics show how much less likely people are to have these problems who lead a more vegetarian diet. And down in the basement, you see that McDonald's has just opened up a new franchise in the hospital. And you see the loop, self-fulfilling loop of lunacy. And you walk on. You walk down the road a while, and you come to a playground where the school children are playing. You hear their calls and their cries and their excitement. You are drawn to their innocence, to their spontaneity, to their freshness, to their aliveness. It's exciting to you to feel renewed by the presence and the expressions of these youngsters. You feel that in each newborn human being, perhaps, God has said, I haven't given up on the human race yet. You feel the possibilities. And then you go into the classrooms and you see on the walls the four food group charts, or the eating right pyramid that still tells kids today, you must eat 2 to 3 servings from the meat group every day, 2 to 3 servings from the dairy group every day to be healthy. Even though we know the people who don't eat meat live on average 8 years longer than people who do, and are healthier by every measure we have of health profile than people who do. And you see on the desks a coloring book supplied by the Milk Producers Association in which kids are told to color Dad happy if Dad has had his butter and his ice cream and his cheese, but if he hasn't, to color him sad. And you walk on. You decide to walk a long ways down. And you walk on and you come finally to another part of this planet. You come to a tropical rainforest, where in a space as large as this small room, there might be 150 different species of trees, of ecstatic an expression of life, teeming life. But in the distance you hear chainsaws, you smell smoke, because the rainforests are being cut down and burned to create land on which to graze cattle, much of which is exported to the United States, so that people whose cholesterol levels are already dangerously too high can have hamburgers approximately a quarter century. And you walk away. You walk a ways. You want to get away from this. So you walk a long ways to a very primitive place where people do not have anything like the kind of material things that we take for granted. You come to a land where people work very hard for very little. And you know that there are many such places on this planet. And to see a child that is crying, and you're drawn to it, and you see its mother come from the field in which she has been working to pick it up and hold it, rock it. But it doesn't stop crying, and you understand why. This child is hungry, and his mother has no food for it. Even though the field in which she's working is growing grain. And in working in that field alongside her is her husband, the baby's father. But you see, the field is owned by the elite, by the privileged few. And they use that grain to feed the animals they consume. And there's none left. And there's no land left, no good land left to grow staples, rice, beans for her and her family. And so the baby keeps crying. And you know, you watch it cry, you listen, and you see that it only stops crying finally when it stops breathing. And at this point you stop. And you say, my God, God, why do you allow it? God, why don't you do something? And at this point, a voice is heard to say, I did do something. I made you. See, we're here tonight to honor, to support the most important person in this room, who is the person who is seated in your chair. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for acting. I love you all very much.
We have a reception in the back, and John will be here to sign books, which are available at the table right where you came in. So help yourselves to food and books and all that stuff. Thanks a lot for coming.